Bim, bam, boom, bop, pow. We are back with the all factions, everything in the one roster, global, super awesome tier list of unit types. We have 8 left. Let's do another one. I'm going to isolate it and then I'll describe the criteria. So let's do skirmish units today. Get rid of all these. Skirmishers, skirmish units. So what this tier list is about is not campaign specific, not multiplayer specific. It is just if this unit showed up on a battlefield, how good is it compared to other units in its role on a battlefield? For example, like Savage Orcs are probably better than Empire Swordsmen, but how much and for what purpose? Some people have brought up, I promise I'm not going to relitigate everything all the time. I'm just explaining the premise of the video. Some people bring up that I talk about gold a lot. Gold is just a good measure of how many of this unit can exist. Like, if a Skaven slave costs 125, is it fair to compare a single Skaven slave versus a single Savage Orc? Or is it fair to think that that Savage Orc would be fighting 4 Skaven slaves or 5 Skaven slaves? And on a 5v1, could a Savage Orc beat the Skaven slaves? That's what we're thinking about here. So that's why I factor in cost a lot, is because cost is relevant. Otherwise, this tier list would literally just be, what's the most expensive unit? That one's the best, right? So we do factor in cost for how gold efficient they are, how far they take your money, or how many of them you could afford for a different one. That is why I keep talking about gold. It's just a useful metric to think about how effective a unit is, right? Right. So let's get on with it. All skirmish units compared to other skirmish units. Who is the best of the skirmish units? We'll start with the Skaven Night Runners. Night Runners, 450 gold. They're very good on the Skaven roster, but compared to other skirmishers, they have some problems. I'm going to put them in B tier. They have some physical resistance, if I remember correctly, because that's their dodge, quote unquote, is some physical resistance. They are short range, low damage, only good versus lightly armored things. Very good versus very good as anti-air forces. Decent at dealing with cavalry and stuff, but a lot of what makes them strong on the Skaven roster is specific to their synergy within the Skaven roster. As a standalone unit, the Night Runners are decidedly fine. They're fine, but they're really good. For example, like if heavy cavalry is trying to get into your back line, you can send Night Runners in between the cavalry and your troops, and when they stop to fight your Night Runners, they'll get hit with poison wind globes, and the globes will kill your Night Runner, but it'll also kill the heavy cav. Or Rat Ogres will charge in and get some damage out. But that's not really the Night Runner being great. That's the rest of the Skaven roster being great. So on its own merits, it's B. It's fine, just not amazing. What is amazing is Gutter Runners. Gutter Runners are definitely A tier. More expensive than the Night Runner, but they also perform more than the Night Runner does. Higher weapon strength. Usually have a slow with a little snare net they have, and they can also have a poison variant that extra slows and reduces damage, and then they're better melee fighters. They can actually beat dogs that chase them down. Night Runners have a lot of the same weaknesses Gutter Runners have a lot of the same weaknesses as Night Runners, but they're just a little more elite, so less things threaten them, so they're very good. Pterodons with Fire Leech Bolas. I don't know if basic Pterodons are on this list later, so I'll talk about them a little bit, but I tend to lump stuff that's incredibly similar together. Pterodons with Fire Leech Bolas, I'm going to put in A. Basic Pterodons would be in B. So I'm going to still put these guys in A. Yeah, I'm going to still put them in A, but it's close between A and B for me. In multiplayer, they're all right. Fire Leech Bolas are useful to decrease enemy healing if they have a bunch of healing effects, or punish blob fights of some kind if those happen to form. And then their Rock Drop is very good against blob fights as well. They have some okay melee stats, really not great at all, but once they run out of ammo, or even if you just notice something routing that you really want to take off the map, you can just put them in melee mode and walk it off the map, and that's fine. They're very fast and can defend themselves in the sky relatively okay, and they're pretty cheap. That is all kind of a B, maybe bottom of A performance, but the reason I put them in A is thinking about how my campaigns go with them. And again, don't think of Tic-Tac-Toe with all of his crazy buffs for them. That's Tic-Tac-Toe's strength. But in every Lizardmen campaign, their Rock Drop is very helpful for dealing with blobs and clearing off walls and sieges. And I just think that's incredibly helpful. Plus their ability to get behind AI lines and just harass cannons that are going to threaten your big monsters or something. So I'm going to bump them up a little bit of A just because how good they are in campaign. I think it's worth it. So yeah, I think they're an A. They're a very good little skirmish unit. Skink Skirmishers, B. They've taken some nerfs over the last couple patches. They do decent damage. They're very cheap, and they apply poison. Probably the lowest price point to apply poison at range in the game, if I'm thinking of it. Quite probably. But they only land in B. Very similar things to say about them as the Night Runners. Short range, very, very squishy to anything that catches up to them. They're actually way worse melee combatants than the Night Runners, but they have poison. So it's like, all right, your worst melee combatants, you have poison, kind of end up in the same spot, B. They're fine. They're fine. They're worth taking for how cheap they are, but anything will kill them. S tier. First S tier is going to be Chameleon Skinks. Chameleon Skinks are very, very good and highly underrated, in my opinion. Their melee stats are solid, but their missile strength is incredible. The fact that they're stocked is very nice. They're still rather cheap, so we're still not even talking about a crazy elite unit. Chameleon Skinks are amazing. I actually just cast a game that'll probably come up on the channel before this, but it was 2 Chameleon Skinks shooting at a Hydra from the Dark Elves, and they got a lot of DPS out on that Hydra. It was pretty nuts, and they were still both full HP at the end of the game and fighting Marathi in hand-to-hand combat. Now, they're S tier with a 675 price point and stock, right? Like, will they beat Cold One Knights that catch up to them? No, but they'll do better than you'd think. And they're just great. Chameleon Skinks are good little helpers who are always around. Next up is Illyrian Reaver Archers. I'll put you in S tier as well. Illyrian Reaver Archers are quite solid. Their DPS isn't great, but that's the only negative thing I have to say about them. At a relatively low price point, very good speed, incredible leadership because they're a high elf unit. Very, very good as light cavalry. When you just throw them into melee mode to run down archers, they'll do insane damage. I think I mentioned their high leadership, but they have insanely high leadership because they're a high elf unit, so they're hard to get rid of them. They will keep coming back and keep coming back, even with a couple models. And with ranged attacks, something that a lot of people forget about is when you get shot at by a missile attack, you get a leadership debuff for being under missile fire. So if you even have like 4 models of a high elf Illyrian Reaver in the late game and you come back and start shooting at stuff, you're just applying that leadership debuff to already super wounded units. And their high leadership allows them to keep coming back and doing that. 360 shooting and their incredible speed usually keeps them out of all danger. So high elf Illyrian Reaver Archers are very, very good. Their DPS isn't amazing, but it's their low price point and their versatility that makes me put them in S tier. Dark Rider Peter Crossbows are going to go in B tier. Armor-piercing missiles with pretty high damage output is very positive. But they're the exact opposite of the Illyrian Reaver Archers. I don't have anything else nice to say about the Dark Rider Peter Crossbows. Decent DPS with high armor piercing is strong, but non-360 shooting, incredibly poor melee capacity is pretty brutal. Their leadership isn't nearly as high as their high elf brethren, especially after Murderous Prowess and Murderous Mastery wear off. They're just kind of fine. And they're in B. So far, nobody's been in the C or D tier, so none of the units I've talked about are bad. But Dark Rider Pure Crossbows are exactly what you pay for with them. They are armor piercing, damage, and that is it. Blackheart Corsair Handbows. A tier unit. Decent little missile strength at a teeny tiny range, but then hybrid melee stats and high armor can keep them safe from a lot of things. They're not an S tier. They just don't have enough range DPS. They are mostly a melee unit that kind of has a little crossbow shot just for fun. You'll use it to like kite out vampire counts or something, but you only really get to use them when you know a melee fight is going to happen no matter what, but you want a little bit of shooting, maybe some anti-air. They can be okay versus Greenskins. Mostly see them versus vampire counts. Trying to think of any other matchups you really see these guys anymore, but that's about it. The main problem is if you know you're going to get caught, you can just take some of the Dark Elves' superior melee tools like Blackheart Corsairs or Witch Elves. Especially Witch Elves are fantastic little infantry fighters. So if you know you're going to get into melee, why not just take your fantastic melee fighters, you know? But aside from that, just comparing them to other skirmish units, they just don't have a whole heck of a lot going for them to put them up in S tier. They are solidly A. They're very, very good. A lot of the similar things I have to say about Gutter Runners, I can say about them. But like Gutter Runners, their higher stats and higher armor means light cavalry that catches up to them will at least pay a heavy price for taking them down. And heavy cav will run them over, but heavy cav will run most of these things over. Oh, handgun and pistol bats. I'm going to lump those two together because they're very similar, and they're both in D tier. Their damage output is abysmally low. They are very janky with when they want to fire or when they decide they're obstructed or when they're not obstructed. They are crazy squishy. They're actually decently expensive for what you get out of them. They are just terrible right now. The handgun and pistol bats are just the worst things I've ever seen. Bomber bats are a little better. They're at C tier. Good disruption on the bombs, decent-ish damage, but still squishy, still very low range, and sometimes they just decide not to throw with some weird range jank that I can't put them higher because they're just not reliable. All the Vampire Coast bats are not doing particularly great right now, but especially the Bomber bats feeling pretty bad. Shadow Warriors. I'll put you in B. Good damage, good range. Non-armor piercing missiles is a bit of a minus, and their high price point is a bit of a minus. Light armor means most cavalry or dogs that catch up to them can get good damage out, even though their stats are relatively high and they fight back okay. Low armor just means those things can get damage in, so... Shadow Warriors are one of my favorite skirmish units. I think they are one of the most balanced ones. Like, they do exactly what you think they do, and they do exactly what you don't think they do, you know? So, yeah, they're great. But B tier, not punching above their weight, not punching below it. They are perfectly balanced, in my opinion. Shadow Walkers, I'm going to put down in C. Shadow Walkers are a bit too expensive for their low armor point. So a lot of what we've talked about with this other stuff where it's like, oh, it has low armor, so when dogs catch up to it, it'll do a lot of damage. Yeah, but normally those things are cheaper. Shadow Walkers just don't do enough damage to justify how much more expensive they are. And then their melee stats are relying on melee attack and melee defense, not armor and HP. So having low HP and low armor when you're getting charged by things, whatever's attacking you is going to get a charge bonus. And sometimes it's even attacking you in the rear if you're trying to kite away and run away. So your melee attack and melee defense aren't nearly as important as armor and HP. And the Shadow Walkers just are punished for that much more than the Shadow Warriors because of their higher price point. So you're losing more of a unit for that sort of thing. And they also don't trade well when they're getting shot at because they're not shielded or anything. So they take a lot of damage. I believe we have all of the Marauder Horsemen lumped together because there's like 70 of them. And they're going to go in S tier. Marauder Horsemen are the best skirmish unit ever. They dictated the meta in most of Warhammer 2, and a lot of Warhammer 3 they're doing very well. There's Marauder Horsemen of Nurgle, of Khorne, of Tzeentch, of Slaanesh. All of the variants have something that make them incredible. Throwing axes either have armor piercing, fire damage, or poison. The straight shot ones of Tzeentch have their own armor debuff and, like, I think they set you on fire, but they also have magic damage. Slaanesh's have magic damage and just a high weapon strength. So all of the marked variants are really good. The Norskin Marauder Horsemen are great. I don't know if I have Marauder Horsemasters on here as a separate unit or part of the same thing, but Norska's Marauder Horsemen with throwing axes, Marauder Horsemen, and Marauder Horsemasters are all incredible. They do a lot of damage at range, and then they are really good hybrid light cavalry that can charge in there. They can defend themselves from dogs by just using their cavalry mass to countercharge dogs and knock them out. 360 shooting, nothing to complain about. All Marauder Horse blanks are all fantastic and all deserve S tier. They are everything you possibly could want out of a skirmish cav at a cheap price point. Skeleton Horse Archers also go up into S tier. Incredibly cheap, unbreakable because they're undead, and their arrows do a crazy amount of damage. Their melee performance is terrible, just the worst possible thing, but their archer performance is very strong, and frequently when the Tomb Kings rout something off, they don't have a ton of cavalry that can go run it down. They often are busy using that cavalry elsewhere, so just having Skeleton Horse Archers that can chase stuff off the map or poke down a large target in the late game is pretty huge. And these guys are pretty cheap. I think they're under 500 gold. Yeah, they're 475. Goblin Wolf Riders. A little bit C. Goblin Wolf Riders' missile strength is just too low, and their melee stats are too low. Wolf Riders, the basic version, not the archer version. Wolf Riders are already very bad melee combatants, and they're only useful in very niche matchups. Reducing their melee stats even further and giving them a terrible missile attack on top of it is just not very good, and you pay a higher price for it. They're quite terrible. I only keep them out of D tier because they are still good at running down things. Their incredibly high speed makes it super easy. If anything routes in front of the Greenskin rush, these guys can just peel off and go run it down. Better than some of the other stuff on this list, like Shadow Walkers and Bats have a harder time doing damage to things that are running away from them, while the Wolf mounts the Wolf Riders are on have good attack animations for running down targets. So their proficiency at running down stuff already routing is the only thing keeping them out of D tier. Next up is Spider Riders. They're going to get all the way up to B. I have a lot of similar complaints about the Wolf Riders as the Spider Riders. Incredibly low melee stats, like just too low for what they do. Not very high missile strength at all. The only thing that takes these guys up to B is their poison. And then Strider plus some better melee defense can make them a little tankier to getting attacked. So they're just a little tankier and they provide more support getting them up to B. They're still great at running stuff down like the Wolf Riders are, but they offer a little bit more at not that higher of a price point. So they're more worth it than the Wolf Riders are. They're B. They make it to the middle. Pistoliers of the Empire, A tier. Non-armor piercing missiles, but straight shot 360 shooting, very high speed, can get these guys out of a lot of bad situations. They're good anti-air, anti-light cavalry, anti-dog at only 500 gold. I don't have a whole lot else to say about them, but Pistoliers are pretty darn great. Outriders grenade launchers currently S tier. Pretty squishy, and at a decently high price point at 800 gold. Piss poor melee stats, non-360 shooting, everything negative to say about them. The only thing that keeps them in S tier is their damage. Oh boy, their damage. All the negative things about the Dark Rider Pure Crossbow, but oh, you said the Dark Rider Pure Crossbow is good armor piercing damage and it's in B tier. Why is he in S? Dude, have you ever seen the grenade launchers literally delete an entire unit in one volley? And elite units take like 2 or 3 volleys to delete? Oh, they are incredible. If you hold their hand, they will do so much work. They're the Changebringers before Changebringers existed. Outrider grenade launchers do incredible damage versus infantry, and they are, while they are niche, they fulfill that niche so well, they deserve S tier. Gyrocopters, brimstone guns. Do I have normal gyros? Nope, this is both gyrocopters. Okay, gyrocopters are still going to be S tier. Even after their nerfs, even after their cost increases, gyrocopters are still great. They've gotten speed reductions, they've gotten damage reductions, they've gotten all these reductions, but their capacity to run things down, their insane speed, their crazy high DPS. The brimstone gun is pretty bad, but it's good against low leadership factions, I guess. The steam gyro is good at killing anything if it gets shots on it, and they're very hard to take down in the sky. Incredibly good at dodging ranged fire that's coming at them. They're just super responsive and can whip around and dodge a bunch of things. Gyrocopters are insane and truly the supreme aerial force the dwarves can bring right now. Following up is the Gyro Bomber. I'm actually going to put you in C. Gyro Bombers were bugged for a bit where they could like fire all of their ammunition at once and do a ton of damage, but without that, they're actually not that good. Less models than the gyrocopters with the regular gyrocopters. The Gyro Bomber is a little easier to hit from ranged units, a little slower to turn, a little slower to move, less good at running things down, less DPS overall, I've noticed from their cousins because they have less models putting out the shots. And then their bomb drops are actually kind of worse than the Gyro Bombers in some case, and they're more expensive. So just kind of being worse than the gyrocopters in every way for more money really makes me down on them. I think they're like C. Mounted Yeomen, D tier. If you've ever played with the Mounted Yeomen, you know why they're D tier. They meet the criteria of being a skirmish cavalry technically, and they have no positives about them. Low missile strength, low leadership, low melee stats at not that low of a price point to justify how terrible they are. Way Watchers, S tier. One of the penultimate amazing super buff skirmishers of all Warhammer history. Way Watchers are the best skirmish units in the entire game. Highest DPS, stalked, incredible range, pretty bad melee stats and very squishy, but more than make up for it with their damage. They are probably the best unit. If there was an S+, the Way Watchers would be up there. Alone right now, though something might join them eventually. Way Watchers can carry entire games if you take 2 or 3 of them. They are fantastic. Hawk Riders are D tier. Expensive flying skirmish cavalry. Hawk Riders' DPS is insanely low. Their melee prowess is also pretty meh. They do okay when they charge an armored unit from the sky and they get decent damage, but if that armored unit fights back or anybody comes to help out at all, these guys will get killed instantaneously for so much money, you'll cry. Hawk Riders are just terrible. They used to be a cheese strategy where if your opponent didn't have any anti-air, you could take 4 of them and just win any game. But Warhammer 3 nerfed them into the dirt, and now they are terrible. Oh! Hazel got all angry. All right, Sisters of the Thorn. That is another S tier unit for the Wood Elves. Sisters of the Thorn have very good melee stats, some very nice supportive spells as well. Strong 360 shooting with a lot of ammunition and poison. They're quite good. Scissor Thorn offer Fleshed Stone, and then I think Curse Monster here, or is that just Earthblood? I forget what exact spells they have, but they are very good. Kind of like Wild Riders and melee prowess. All right, up next, Glade Riders. Honestly, that's another A or B tier. Let's go A. Slightly higher combat prowess than some of the stuff in B tier, and they can do magic damage, poison damage. So, Glade Riders, decently flexible, good in a lot of situations. Similar things to other horse skirmish cavalry where they're good against dogs that are trying to chase them down. They can just turn and charge them and get a lot of impact damage off. Decent hybrid melee stats, so very solid. Not a lot of complaints. Pretty cheap, too, relatively, for what they do. Not as good as Sisters of the Thorn, but still solid. Deepwood Scouts. A. It's A or B. They do enough damage with enough range at a low enough price point to kind of creep into A, but they're risking it on all of them. Like, their damage isn't that high, their utility isn't that high, they're very squishy, but they have enough range, and they're only like 800 gold or so, depending on the variant you get. I don't know. They'll get into A, but they're pushing it. They're pushing it. But Wood Elf Skirmishers are some of the best, as you can see on this list. Deepwood Scouts are just mini Way Watchers. Not as much damage, not as much range, but a little cheaper. Just barely staying in A. Almost put them in B for how squishy they are. Centaurs or Throwing Axes, S tier. Armor-piercing Throwing Axes are very, very good, and then they're still incredible in melee for being Centaurs. They have a lot of the Beastmen buffs, like Primal Fury or whatever the thing is. Crap, what is that called? It's the little drinking horn looking thing. Rowdy, I think it is. But they have perfect vigor until they fall below a certain leadership threshold. Armor-piercing axes are very strong. Melee stats are very strong. Centaurs, Throwing Axes, S tier for sure. Very, very good skirmish unit. Nurgle's Plague Drones, B. Not thinking of the ROR, the Angels of Decay. Basic Plague Drones. Very expensive. Not incredibly good in melee, honestly. They're okay at melee. And they're squishy-ish for their price point. Rely on a lot of healing from Nurgle's army abilities or spells. But they do have strong grenades when they get aerial superiority and can bomb fools. They can carry entire games if you don't have enough aerial supremacy to like knock them down in melee or shoot them down out of the sky. So they can be rather punishing for blobs and whatnot. And their landing attacks aren't that bad either, so you can find some archers in the back line. Like, you can bomb a blob of something, and then when archers come over to disrupt you, you can just land on them and get some decent damage out, or you can rear charge cavalry. So they're flexible enough to stay in B tier where they have enough situations where they're useful, but their high price point and relative ease with which you can kill them does keep them out of A or S for me. Kislevite Horse Archers, C tier. Just not really that great. Very squishy. Their melee stats are super whatever. The only thing that keeps them on a D tier for me is Buyer Blood's passive, where they get unbreakable, so they can suicide dive in to kill some artillery or something important. But a lot of the same thing you've been hearing out of me for the stuff in C and D tier. Middling melee performance, low armor, generally not that high leadership, generally not that high DPS, keeps them out of higher tiers. So I put them in C. I could see an argument for them being in B, that's fine. I just rate them very lowly, because whenever I see Kislevite Horse Archers, I'm like, well, this is pretty whatever. So, Balloon, D. DPS output is insanely terrible. It has no melee stats whatsoever. And is the Sky Junk even in here? Weird. I don't know where the Sky Junk's image is, but I guess I'll do the Sky Junk and the Balloon. They're both D. They are relatively tanky, tankier than you'd think. They have higher HP pools than you'd think, but they have like literally no melee stats on purpose. Their ranged output isn't very strong either, intentionally. CA was trying to not make them toxic, but in that effort, they also kind of made them useless. It's like, all right, so it's up there, not doing too much damage. They're weak to archers, weak to cannons, weak to skirmish cav, weak to flying melee units. But they're around, and especially the War Lantern does no damage at all. At least the Sky Junk does a little bit of damage to blobs and whatnot, but they're still very weak. They're very expensive for their price point, and they're just not maneuverable or flexible enough to deal with a mobile environment. They're only good in campaign. They're terrible in multiplayer. And even good. I mean, I wouldn't say they're good in campaign, but just like the Sky Junk might be fine in campaign. Thunderbarge is gonna go in A. Maybe S. A. I'll go with A for the price point. So Thunderbarges are very, very strong, and they're banned from a lot of stuff, and people might be surprised I didn't put them in S tier. They have a lot of positives. That stupid spear they have on the front that can like insta-kill a chariot lord or hero, do a ton of damage to them, do a ton of damage to any single entity, honestly. That harpoon is some BS. Their damage output is insane. They have nearly infinite ammunition. They're pretty tanky in melee in the sky, and they can usually defend themselves all right. All that stuff sounds very S tier, and they've been banned in multiplayer tournaments forever. And when a Dwarven Doom stack rolls up on me by the AI, I hate the Thunderbarges. I hate all that stuff. That stuff's all S tier, yada yada. But looking at them individually, they are like 3,200 gold. They're not squishy, but very easily damaged by ground ranged units. They're getting CA is getting better about programming it to get hit by more and more flying units every patch. But the reason it's still banned from most multiplayer tournaments is I call it a light switch unit, where it's either on or it's off. If your opponent's army lacks the tools to take it out, it wins the entire game. If they have the tools to take it out, you automatically lose because it's so much of your army. So it's banned because it makes terrible content and it's unfun, and in some cases it's overpowered, in some cases it's underpowered. It just doesn't provide a single positive interaction in multiplayer, is a lot of the reason I usually keep it banned. Campaign's similar. If you have an army or a faction that can handle flying chariots with infinite ammunition, then yeah, you'll be fine. But if you don't, you get completely wrecked. So this thing is A tier, but like it's not S as far as actual strength to cost ratio goes. It's just on S for most people's list because it's so freaking annoying. But like true objective analysis, this thing has been nerfed quite a lot, and it's manageable now in a lot of situations. There's just those couple where you literally can't do anything. You just have to watch it kill your whole army. And it sucks. Oh, Hobgoblin Cutthroats with their little ninja stars. Those recently got a buff. I'm going to put them in C. They're okay, but their melee stats are still kind of whatever. Their ranged capacity is still pretty bad. They have low ammunition, and they route pretty quickly because they're still hobgoblins. They have gotten buffs taking them out of objectively useless D tier to C tier, but they're still a little limp as far as that goes. And the final thing to round out this list is the Hobgoblin Wolf Raider Archer. I'm going to put him also in C. Again, he just got buffs, but these guys are very, very squishy. They have an incredibly low HP pool. Okay melee stats. Fire damage arrows is quite nice, but not too much DPS. Very squishy, low leadership. They just moved from D to C because they got price decrease. So, nah. C tier. And there you go. There's all the skirmish stuff. Thunderbarge, I could see you saying it's a chariot. It's just a flying chariot. I could see you saying it's a war machine, like a artillery piece. I don't know. It fills a lot of pockets. So we had the other flying missile barrage things here. So I put the Thunderbarge there. Doesn't really matter. That it's got to end up on some list or another. So here's your skirmish list. I feel pretty confident about it. Just looking top to bottom, I'm like, yeah, those are units that are good. Yeah, those are units that are still pretty good. Those are units that are meh. Oh, those are units that I consider bad. And those are units that I consider terrible. So I don't see anything crazy out of place here from my own personal opinion. If you disagree, that's fine. Just keep it respectful. Goodbye. Roar. Subscribe, yes.